Hi there, Ishi here, and welcome to the Higher Life, where we offer empowerment education for an evolving humanity. In every video, we'll take a concept or a set of conditions and really unpack them from a perspective of personal agency. That is to give you insight into how you can actually work with your life in a more skillful way. Now, the education here, it's absolutely not about fixing yourself, solving betterment, advancement, improvement. This is about realism to some degree and really considering what do we have available to us to meet our life and the conditions that come our way, the circumstances, the events, the people, the relationships, in a way that develops a broader or more in-depth capacity to actually work with people in relationships to generate better outcomes for yourself and also for the collective, the whole of humanity. And the topic I'm talking about today, it really cuts to the core of this. Why are our workplaces so challenging? I mean, all of my colleagues, my friends, my clients, and myself included, have experienced what it's like to be in a workplace where you just feel exhausted, burnt out, stressed, confused, being in a state of conflict constantly, maybe with your colleagues, with your bosses, or just feeling that the workplace is somehow diminishing your capacity to really show up in the job. And it's a really common theme, workplace stress. Most people find workplaces challenging in one way or another. So why is this so? If we look at it very simplistically, the workplace, at least the modern workplace, is very much focused on outcome, on results, on, producing something not meaningful necessarily, but something that actually can have value out in the world. And so it means that our workplaces are really organized around functionality, around effectiveness, around results, and not around our humanity. So when we enter our workplaces, we kind of lose our humanity to some degree or another. We lose our capacity to see each other as humans who are feeling beings, sensory beings, energy beings. We don't all have the same levels of energy. We have conditions in our lives that differ greatly from other people. And at our workplaces, that humanity, it very rarely shows up. However, it does show up in one specific way, and it's usually through conflict. When you're in conflict with another person, or there's a problem person, a person who doesn't have the skills to actually work well with others in the workplace, and nobody's doing anything about it. So this humanity really reveals itself often in the shadow, in ways that sabotage the potential of the business to actually deliver amazing outcomes. And when I say amazing outcomes, I don't necessarily mean products or services that have value out in the world on the market. What I mean is having a very high functioning human relationship system within your organization or within your workplace. But the key to this is not what most people really explore. It's developing the capacity for the human being to tap into their own resourcefulness, to actually have better relationships inside their workplace, to develop the skills and the competency to be able to meet those workplace challenges from your humanity. Inner resourcefulness like compassion, like sensitivity, like curiosity, playfulness, discernment, that is such a powerful inner resource that we have as human beings to be able to discern what is really within my scope here and what do I need to let go. What can I control in this environment and what is beyond my influence? We are often waiting for somebody to do something about problems or about problem people, and they don't. And it leaves us feeling very powerless and very vulnerable. And I would say that that is also a key aspect of why people feel so exhausted at work. It is a very, very vulnerable place to find yourself, to not be happy, not be supported, and not be functioning at the capacity that you can. And I almost catch myself out there with using that word functioning. What I really mean is that you're not able to bring your whole self into the work because the workplace, the conditions just don't provide the space for you to be able to do that. So we're often waiting or seeking or searching for the right workplace, the place where, we will be received, where the environment will be open and patient and respectful enough for us to be able to try different things out without feeling like we're not achieving or producing enough output to stay in our jobs. Every single workplace is dependent on well-functioning relationships, and most workplaces really wouldn't rate highly on this. It doesn't mean that you're not still getting the output. It just means that that output is being produced in a toxic or very stressful environment. And sometimes it's not the whole organization or the whole institution, it's teams within it. But even these small areas where there is a real breakdown between people and they're not getting the support that they need to be able to develop better ways of working together, it's like a cancer. It kind of spreads through the system without you realizing it until it's too late. Now, here's another reason why workplaces are so challenging. In modern culture, we have become very identified with our function or our role in the workplace. And this is because work is where validation occurs in this day and age. It's about fulfilling your potential. It's about showing what you can achieve. It's about receiving rewards. And you really get clear on this when you're outside the workforce for some time. I know myself, and I share this story a lot as a mother. I have been out of the workforce in terms of full-paid employment for almost 16 years. And yes, I'm coaching in my practice, but really my primary role has been at home and being very present in the raising of my 2 children. And that's because I have been raising them in a culture without any extra support. And one of the parents really needed to show up and be this stable influence. And that was me. And I have got a lot out of it. But absolutely in my culture, in my time of history, there's no reward or recognition for that role. It really does come back into who are you as a professional? How do people perceive you? Are you out there in the world? Are you getting valued through what you do? So of course, when you're working in a workplace which isn't working out for you, that in some way is quite toxic, or you're just experiencing conflict with another person, but it's getting to the point where you're waking up at 2 a.m. and you're thinking, I really just cannot go on with this any longer. It's not a simple decision because your worth, your identity has become tied to the workplace. And there's a real sense or fear of what is going to happen if you somehow cannot keep functioning in that environment, or you can't find another one to function in. So we often look for another job or another role or another way to feel fulfilled and to find a better space for us to be ourselves in. But what I've found with working with, so many people over the years in this challenge, people in very senior positions, people who've been, unfairly treated at work, even though they deliver great results, is there's not a lot you can do. Yes, you can come and see a coach, but the work that you would be doing with the coach is about really stepping into, okay, what is the reality of the situation that I'm in? Sometimes it's possible to actually stay in difficult situations and learn through them, as long as it's not at that level of abuse. There are some workplaces where it's really not healthy to stay. But there are a lot of workplaces where the challenges that you're facing are very common, and even though they feel deeply personal, they're often systemic. And what do I mean by that? They're part of this larger relationship system of this team, of this organization that you're in, and you're feeling it and experiencing it as personal because it's showing up in a personal situation. But it's often a very powerful opportunity to start developing a more mature approach to your life. We know as we become adults, there's a lot of difficult things that we just need to accept and integrate into our lives. But we can learn to be more patient, more forgiving, more humorous, more curious, and more playful about how we show up in these situations. Sometimes it's okay to just take a step back and not show up. A lot of my clients I've advised at times to just take some time, do less. Put more energy into stabilizing yourself than reacting or responding to a situation that you just may not be able to get a better result out of. And often these things do settle down. It's that reactivity that keeps conflicts going at work. But coming back to the original inquiry, why are our workplaces so challenging? They're very similar to family systems. You're working with people day in and day out. It is actually a very intimate experience to be colleagues, even if you don't feel that in the day-to-day operations or you've got separate desks. But you're all inside this system together. And if the system is stressed, everybody will feel some sort of stress, even if they're benefiting personally from the organization. Or if the system is doing well and there's a lot of positivity or a lot of high functioning people in terms of relationships, you may feel this overall sense of calm or ability to be able to really show up differently, even though you personally might not be the one that's actually, meeting the system that way. It's really fascinating to understand how we are affected by the systems that we operate inside of, whether it's your family, whether it's your workplace. However, the difference between a family system and a workplace system is this level of humanity that is accepted, that is normalized. And even in this day and age, when we're teaching all our children about emotional intelligence, social intelligence, compassion, forgiveness, curiosity, all these really core meta skills, we are still having this experience in our workplaces where we're expected to be quite robotic, to think of ourselves as a function, to show up even when we're under great duress in our personal lives and not ask for support, to take on the behavior of other people as our personal problem, rather than understanding that people operate differently and sometimes you just have to work with a difficult person even if you don't want to. This is about growing up and maturing. However, one thing we can do is start to bring more humanity into our workplaces as a conscious effort. Not you just show up personally with more humanity, because if you're the only one and the system doesn't embrace it, it becomes a very uncomfortable position. So this is part of a greater cultural change I believe is underway, across all of humanity, in our workplaces, in our families, in our schools. This humanizing, this remembering that we're actually sensory, feeling, creative, loving beings who are highly relational, and we need to be focusing on our capacity for relationship, because that is what is uniquely human. We can cultivate intimacy, innovation through, team efforts. Relationships are an intelligence all of their own. So the quicker that we can step up and start to understand what is this relationship systems intelligence, how can we cultivate more of it in the people that we work with in our teams, as leaders, I'm thinking, or CEOs, or people who are running organizations, or people in HR. It's no longer about people learning technical skills. This is all about, developing our humanity and the relationship systems intelligence that really underpins the way humans interact with each other. So I just wanted to make this a short one today, because I really just wanted to get that one message across that, our workplaces are challenging because they deny our humanity. They deny the fact that relationships are at the center of almost all workplaces, and that the more equipped we are to cultivate better relationships with ourselves, with others, with teams, with the work that we do, the more nourished and supported we will feel, and the better, our workplaces will become. Not as an improvement, but just a natural evolution, because when we bring more of ourselves into our workplaces and we're more conscious about the way we relate to each other, just the vibration of the whole place lifts. And that might sound like a very esoteric word, but as energy beings, vibration is really important. We feel the atmosphere in our workplaces. We don't interpret it through our brain. Yes, the brain tells you a story, but we feel it. We know when we're in a workplace where we feel comfortable, at ease. Maybe there's some challenging times, but overall it's a good place to be. And we know those workplaces where we dread on Sunday night going in on Monday, where we have higher states of anxiety and sleepless nights. But fear not, if you're one of those people, this is a very, very common issue, and it's something that almost every human being who goes into a workplace will experience at one time or another. But you can develop a more easeful way to meet the challenges that you're in right now. Start to develop your own sense of being inside these workplaces, and remember that you are human and celebrate your humanity. So I hope this has been insightful, and until next time, take care and love life.